great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. Great to chat again. As always, enjoy talking with you. So it's going to be an interesting set of topics today.
Yeah. So let's see what you say after 45 minutes or so. No, but I prepared interesting stuff. So I really like about, people know you for specific kind of topics, and it would be a waste of opportunity if we don't talk about them. So first of all, if people are already tuned in, so hello everyone outside there, feel free to post a quick comment from where you are watching us, how you are, if everything is good. And then also feel free if you have some questions throughout the session that you'd like to get to answer. So feel free to put them in the chat. So I will have at least a little bit an eye on it to see if we can have something that we can immediately ask. So let's do it like this. So I will try to make an introduction. So I will introduce you with the stuff that I know about you, and feel free to join in, correct me, expand where it makes sense. So first of all, you made an upgrade. So you upgraded from the closet to an office with really a nice view. So that's great. So I know. So this is really great. So then I would say, when people talk about data contracts, they basically immediately think about you, because I think you are so close connected to data contracts that when people think about it, so it's I don't know. So was it something? I guess it was some intention that this kind of, let's say, approach and idea is so close connected to you, because you were one of the first ones, at least that I saw, writing about it.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it was intentional on my part to purely attach it to me. I actually felt the opposite. I remember, maybe a year ago, maybe actually it was probably almost 2 years ago now, when I started really writing on these topics. There was some folks who would sometimes tag me and say, hey, Chad invented this concept of data contracts. And I would always try to go in and correct them and say, no, it actually wasn't me. I think that contracts is very old. And my hope was, if I could speak about it in a way that helped people connect the solution to the problem, that everybody would start implementing this, and it would be something that would grow a lot further beyond me. And what actually happened was, I thought that it was gonna take off kind of like wildfire, or at least I hoped it would take off like wildfire. But I think what I didn't plan for was the amount of I don't know if miscommunication is the right word, but just the amount that people sort of misinterpreted some of the initial ideas. And that meant that I always have to keep coming back and writing sort of corrections and updates to be more clear. And that's just kind of, I think, cemented me as one of the main people talking about it, because I'm just constantly trying to reinforce
true.
how we do
it. Yeah, this is right, and this is what I really like. So at least when we know each other for over 1.5 years or 2 years, so I'm basically following your stuff since then, and I really like how you basically circulate around this topic from different kind of angles. So really bring different kind of angles to it, and for example, I'm someone, I'm not really good at that, to do it again. So to really say, hey, come on, let's take a step back. I explain it again. So I'm super impatient, so I usually don't do this, but I really like how you do this. So always okay, everyone, this is how I approach this kind of thing. So I think this is extremely helpful. And okay, so
there's something I read one time, just very quickly, where I heard that, I think it was it takes repeating something 7 times or 11 times before it really sinks in. And if you're talking about a new concept like this and you're pretty early, then that means it's mainly going to be you doing that repetition 11 times. And so sort of each new cohort of people that followed me and heard about contracts for the first time, that's like another 11 times that you have to repeat it before it releases.
It's quite a lot. So, but the good thing is now, besides like, I think you've started out on LinkedIn to do this stuff, but now you also have a community. So the great community Data Quality Camp, which I'm a member too, and I really enjoy being there. So what was the idea? Was it like to give it more space? Like, because like, I mean, LinkedIn gives some space that you can discuss things, and I can definitely tell. So in the community, you can see a lot more discussions going broader, going deeper, and so on. So what are your plans, or what are your ideas or goals that you want to try to achieve with the community?
Yeah, I think the community serves a few valuable purposes. The first one is that, I can talk about my implementations of data
Yeah.
contracts and data quality in general, but of course that's my bias. I'm going to have some strong opinions just based on what I've seen. But there's other people who have equally strong opinions that have also gone through implementations. And what I wanted was for there to be a sounding board where multiple people from the community that had gone through this could essentially feed off of each other and say, you know what, like this is something I think that sounds good really conceptually, but when we tried it in practice, it didn't work, and it didn't work for X, Y, and Z reasons. Or, hey, this is something that you haven't thought about, and it might be more applicable to your situation than someone else's situation. And I think that kind of back and forth creates an enormous amount of energy around a topic. When really my whole intention, not just talking about data contracts, but like writing online, was to make data quality cool, I guess.
Yeah.
Data quality, data governance have always been these like very uninteresting, conceptually boring, like second order problems. That's like, yeah, we want to get to that at some point, but what we really want to do as a build business is go out and build features. And I felt that data quality was extremely important, and is extraordinarily interesting, and it's really deep. But unless data engineers had a message that they could use to communicate to leadership that was exciting and interesting, then they were just going to forever be in this place of sort of constantly playing catch up and dealing with features. And so that was really the goal I have while writing, is like, can I communicate something in a way that you can show to to your leadership, and they go, not only do I get this, but it actually makes me excited to invest in this. And so that's sort of the other purpose of the community, is to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Did you had some talks with people where it actually worked, so that basically people can say, hey, so this is not really like, this is not a niche topic, so this is like an important topic here. You can see like where like a lot of well-educated people with a lot of experience are talking about that.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's probably my favorite message that I get on LinkedIn. I probably get 3 or 4 of those a week, of someone who said,
Wow.
"Hey, I read your content," and a lot of it is folks that are already like very smart, and they know all the things that I'm saying, but they may not have the language to communicate them to a leadership team in a way that like really gets that like leadership team excited and gets the point across. And so they'll tell me like, "Hey, I told my boss about this, and he didn't really get it. And then I shared your post with them, and he understands. And like now we're having a real conversation about this." Or I was just talking to someone yesterday, and they were saying like, "Yeah, we've used 2 or 3 of your posts. We've shared them a bunch internally, and that's actually really helped us with our positioning to figure out how to prioritize data quality. And now it's like a huge roadmap item for us in 2023." That's like exactly why I'm doing all this. And so the longer I do it, the more that I get those type of affirmations, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's great. I have one part, or I have one final part, let's say, for the introduction part, because this is maybe something that some people don't know. You told me some time ago, and you can still see it from your LinkedIn page. It's like you have a background, and not such a small background, for example, in A/B testing. So you basically really started out, and I think even like in analytics, and then did plenty of time in A/B testing. Is that correct? Or so
Yep.
to take that, is this still something? Because like, I always expected that this becomes more and more mainstream than it is. So it had like a peak time, but I still like when I talk to with product teams, it's not in this position where I was hoping to be, at least like with the teams that I working with. But because like, I mean, you did a huge journey from, let's say, starting out with A/B testing and then implementing and did really like extensive data architecture, and now really like taking care of data quality. So, but from the mindset that you have to develop an A/B testing, is there still something that helps you today to do things maybe differently than if you wouldn't have this
Yeah.
experience?
Well, so just to give you a bit of background, you're
Yeah.
right. For the context of the listeners who don't know, I started off in data science and analytics, and then I moved into A/B testing, and then from there I moved into machine learning, and then from there I moved into data quality. And really, the forcing function for the transition to architecture and quality and data modeling and all those things is that I had this pretty extensive expertise built up at Microsoft and other companies of building platforms. And, I ran hundreds of experiments. And ultimately, a lot of what I wanted to do and the challenges with operating at scale came down to data quality issues. Like all roads kind of pointed to Rome, so to speak. And so I spent 6 months, 3 to 6 months at Convoy. It was like around almost 2 quarters, doing a lot of research and talking to dozens of companies about how they dealt with some of these like scale bottlenecks for experimentation analytics. And I realized that there was no solution. People were sort of dealing with the problem, and I don't even think I realized how systemic it was up until that moment. And that sort of caused a light bulb to go off for me, which was, look, I think that experimentation is a really amazing application of leveraging analytical data. But if your data quality is poor, and if you can't access the data that you need, and if there's no ownership, then you're always going to have a ceiling on what you can do. And the sort of like I said, the light bulb moment was, well, wait a second. If everyone has this ceiling of data quality, then that means that every possible application of data is always going to be limited by this sort of garbage in, garbage out problem, and how bad it is. And if you can solve that, then you essentially unlock all of these use cases that I think most teams would really like to get to, sort of the promise of data and AI and A/B testing and all that stuff. And so that caused me to really refocus on I thought were the foundational issues.
So you just said something interesting, and I just like to highlight, and maybe let's go a little bit deeper on that. It's like you said you reach out to other companies. So it was like you discovered a problem, like in your work, and your reaction was not like, okay, I don't know, I go down to the basement, shut the door, and trying to figure something out. But you basically went outside. So where does it come from? And maybe for people who are maybe not super comfortable with this kind of thought, because like I would expect like this often sometimes that you have in data teams. So what is a good approach to starting this out? Because like I can definitely relate to that. This was it's still my biggest benefit, how I grow on specific kind of topics, to really like reach out to other people who do the same stuff. So what is a good approach to get started with that?
Yeah, I mean, where it came from for me is another thing maybe people don't know is that I actually started off as a liberal arts major. I was a creative writer, which is why it's so easy for me to.
This explains a lot, yeah.
A short segue is sometimes I hear from people like, "Oh my gosh, you spend all day, all you do all day is write these LinkedIn posts," and I'm like, "It takes me 15 minutes to write this." But of course, like I think if you're like my background is in journalism, and my first journalism job that I had, I was sort of the sole contributor to a website. So it was a relatively big website, actually, just in terms of viewership out in Southeast Asia, and I had to publish 2 to 3 articles every day.
Wow.
So I would wake up at 6 a.m. and I would write for like 3 or 4 hours, and then I would go and I would eat lunch, and then I would come back and I would write another 3 or 4 hours. And my job was just to churn through stuff, and that would have to be it would have to be edited, it would have to be fact checked. I can't say anything that's untrue or else I could get sued. So the standard for quality for that is really high. And so if I can get through one of those in 3 hours, and getting through something that's basically just my opinion in like 15-20 minutes is like so easy. But anyway, that was a deviation. But yeah.
Oh, it's interesting. It's a good background. Yeah.
Yeah. So the talking to people, it came from for me, it came from my journalism background, because that's the only way I could do an article. Is like I would have to. I didn't know that much about a lot of the topics I was writing on. I wasn't an expert, and so I would have to reach out to someone who did know, and say and offer them something valuable in exchange for speaking, because there's a time cost, and that means there's an opportunity cost. And so the thing that I would always offer is like, hey, if you come and speak to me, I can write this article about you, or I can feature you, and then I'll send it to you, and that's something that you can share around with your friends and other people. And so that was always a pretty good incentive. And so when I started doing when I shifted over into data and data science and product management, I kept that same mentality. The way but the difference was, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to write an article about you, I just had to think about, well, what would be useful to this person? What would be like an equivalent exchange that they would be excited about? And it was always just the information that I had, right? Because in data, I feel everybody is in their own silo, and we're all kind of trying to reinvent the wheel in our own way. But like, ultimately, we're talking about problems that have been solved hundreds of times in most cases. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Google has already solved almost every data problem you can think of. Twitter, Facebook, all of these people have like basically solved these things. And so they may have solved them for a different scale, but we can still learn from them. And so if I go and I have those conversations, and I have, I've talked to 10 people, and then I send someone a message and say, hey, so-and-so head of data over at Coinbase, here's a problem that I have. If you have this problem, I'm trying to figure out how to solve it. I'd love to brainstorm with you for 30 minutes. And I've talked to Netflix, Airbnb, and Facebook, and I'd be happy to share what I learned from them. Like, anybody who has that problem is going to say yes to that. Like, that's a huge ROI. And then after that happens, you've just added somebody to your network. And so once you maybe have a conversation with someone else, or you hear something interesting, you can always go back to that person and say, hey, like, I learned something new. Like, is this valuable? So I've always looked at it as like, add something valuable to someone's life, and you're probably going to get something valuable in return.
That's great. So maybe really like already like the first takeaway for someone, especially like, because like for me, it was kind of my first experience, because like when I started out on LinkedIn, it was definitely for this kind of reason, because like I felt that I was missing the right persons to bounce back and forth some ideas and thoughts. And when I started out to do more on LinkedIn, it basically created it. I think this was also like the part where our paths were crossing. So like when I was reading some stuff for you, I was commenting on it. We hopped on a call. We talked quite a long time. I can remember for the first time. And it was extremely valuable to me, because like it was, first of all, it was like a feeling I'm not alone with that. And I often have the experience like data teams often feel really like alone. And often there are just not really so many people in a data team. So most of the setups that I work, there are 1-2 people, and they are basically circling around each other. So, and this can be so liberate that you basically go out and see other people. And the good thing is like when you do this in this kind of conversation, because like on conferences, it's nice too, but people don't really open up in this kind of environment. But if you do this like in this personal thing, oh man, yeah, it's a huge boost. A boost was in all aspects for me as well. So
that's true. I think your point about conferences is right. I don't think most people go to conferences and talk about all the problems they have. Usually it's there's some interesting interesting thing that we're watching, some new technology, something like that, and maybe we can talk about how applicable it is. But very, very few people are just sitting down and saying, hey, what are the fundamental, here's all the fundamental problems that I have with my data stack, or, it's really hard for me to find time in my schedule to get to bug fixes or to resolve tech debt. And no one really thinks that there's solutions to these types of things. They just kind of assume that it's a part of doing business. It's like, yeah, I'm always going to be overloaded with tech debt, and I'm always going to be fighting with, my consumers and my stakeholders, because that's just the nature of things. But I don't think that there's anything fundamentally unsolvable about those problems. Like, they're just regular problems like any other. They're just not things that you can necessarily solve through technology in the same way that you can solve like a storage problem. But yeah, I definitely agree with you that it is extremely isolating to be in data oftentimes.
Yeah.
A lot of people are mad at you. They want you to go faster. Things are breaking all the time. Something's not right, and it's all your fault. It just doesn't. It oftentimes doesn't feel good. And this is another very common comment and message that I get is people will send me messages and they'll say stuff like, "Hey, I mean, it was so nice to read what you said because it made me realize I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that my company is especially bad and everybody hates me. It's that there's something fundamentally problematic with the data industry." And not only that, but there are actually solutions out there. Like, there's things that we can do to solve this, and that feels really empowering because it gives you a way forward.
Yeah. And I think, like, coming back, I mean, we talked a little bit like that of course, like, you're trying to push the topic of data quality to make it visible for like data people itself, but also like for everyone around them. But I think another thing that you do, and we just touched that, is like, you basically open up the space that people can say how painful working in data is. So I think this is really like what I always see, and you can see it in the comments. So you just have to read the comments under your post. It's always this kind of thing. Yeah, actually, it's really so hard. So maybe on that. So do you think it's an evolutionary problem, so that it's just like, because we are still, I mean, it sounds crazy because, like, I mean, data applications and setups are out there since the 80s, but let's say on the degree that we do it today, and then how we incorporate it into decision making, it's maybe not so long. So do you think it's just a natural evolution, or is the topic itself, has it itself some aspects that makes it more painful than, for example, being a software developer or so, which can be hard too?
I think it didn't always used to be like this, and this is, I really like talking to Bill Inman, and this is one of the things that he's sort of said multiple times is like, yeah, we kind of had all this down 30 years ago. What happened? And I think 30 years ago was before this emergence of the software engineering boom, right? Data was valuable before software was valuable, because, these big teams would want to know, or software is like a product where these teams would want to know, hey, how do we improve the operations of some process, right? We've got these large scale manufacturing processes. We need to optimize those. Like, how do we know sort of which of our let's say we've got a lot of franchise stores. How do we know which stores are performing and which are not, and why? And that was always a data problem. And it was the whole concept of the data warehouse was really set up to be this centralized vehicle that gave teams the ability to answer all these high value questions. And when you've got a data architect or someone that's sitting at the top of the data bottleneck, and that person's job is literally to create this integration layer and, unite all these various data sources together and to provide the source of truth to everybody in the business to use to make decisions, then a lot of these problems on scale and communication and complexity, like, they kind of go away, right? You just have good, high quality data that you can go and use. And one person or two people or a small team is managing that. But when software engineering really started to blow up as a discipline, the rise of the tech company and Facebook and Google and all of this, what businesses realized is that, oh, wait a second, we actually need to be building features, and we need to be, in Facebook's words, like moving fast and breaking things, right? Where it's better to quickly put some feature out, experiment, see if it's valuable, and if it doesn't, wind it down. If it's not valuable, wind it down, and if it is, scale it up. That kind of became the default operating model for a lot of these companies. And so the way that we treated data then fell in line to the software engineering standards, right? And that meant, like, the whole concept of a data lake, like the reason that we do this data lake thing is because it's easier and faster to just pull the data out of some source and dump it somewhere and let people figure it out. Like, you don't have the bottleneck anymore, and that frees up your engineers to move much faster, right? And that sort of speed is the whole name of the game. And now what people are starting to realize, I think, is like, oh, well, wait a second, what works really, really well for software engineers, like, you have them, like I wrote about this a bit, but the whole concept of a microservice really just emerged for speed and flexibility at the engineering team level. But data is not like a microservice in the sense that, you need to bring everything together to form a single cohesive whole. Like, there has to be some source of truth that represents reality at some point. Somehow that has to happen. And right now we're doing that in the quote unquote data warehouse. We're throwing everything into Snowflake, and we're trying to kind of stitch it together after the fact. And it's that sort of process of trying to stitch a data lake post hoc into something meaningful, and everybody having different interpretations of that, and there's no real change management. That's what's causing a lot of these issues to happen. And so that's like what I think is the evolution, is we've kind of gone from really well organized, well maintained sources of truth to no source of truth, completely decentralized, really, really moving fast and not understanding the differences between data and software. And now starting to move into, okay, maybe for software, it's okay to take this fast approach, and it's okay to be iterative and agile. But for data, we actually do have to treat things a little bit different. And that probably does mean, like, slowing down somewhat.
That's really interesting, because I never really thought about the software angle. And also, like, let's say really like digital services and products, which in the end is like the driving force behind it. But you're right. So, I mean, this is where I started, and also like started with data. But and I discovered, or I came into this world of these classic business kind of data warehouse concepts a lot later, and I was amazed. It was like discovering like a forgotten city in the jungle. So like, oh well, look, there was civilization before. So which is quite crazy. But you're right. So I think this part of this constant speed that you have to do can make things really complicated. So I would like to try, or let's say to do something, because like your latest article was really, I mean, all your articles are really, really good, but what I liked especially about the latest article was like, because like it was taking a step back from data quality and really like looking at the whole thing from a specific kind of angle. Of course, like, again, describing all the problems, but it was basically really like this thing that I have seen so many times now, that you start out, even like, let's say, even like you build a digital product in a startup, and the first half a year, everything is fine. So you are 6-7 people, you're just trying to find product market fit. You don't really need so much data. Most of the data is basically like talking to people. You maybe have some simple stuff. And then at some point you figure out, okay, what we do is working. And now the next step is often like, okay, I have to scale this. So I have to bring it out to different kinds of things. And so you wrote this post about how, especially like this period where you scale up, it's hurtful for every department, but it's especially hurtful for data departments. So maybe can you quickly recap, okay, what is the problem when you scale up, and especially like for the data team? And then maybe afterwards I would like to do maybe a small experiment to really see, okay, how you can manage the scale up maybe in a way that you don't go crazy in the data team, but still can develop some value. But maybe let's start to, let's say, to describe the problem a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, so I like you said, if you're a software engineer and you're working on a microservice and someone says, hey, look, we just need to push some features out, there's a few things that have to happen, right? The first thing that has to happen is there needs to be some architecture, right?
Yeah.
Like in order for the product to work, there has to be some level of design. Maybe it's not that good of a design, maybe it's very scrappy, but some level of design actually has to exist because the product has a function and you need to ensure that that function, it happens in a predictable and expected way, and it doesn't break for the people who are leveraging that product. So you go through a design, you go through a period of testing, you have like a human in the loop review, right? If you use GitHub, then you're probably familiar with this. It's called a pull request. Pull request is just human in the loop review. Right? Yeah. It's just a form of code review. And then you have a whole set of additional tests that happen and CI/CD. So there's a pretty robust framework in place for shipping code, even when we're trying to move really fast. And then we publish the very first version, and we collect feedback. We understand, okay, how are customers using it? And there's this, usually it's in the very early days, there's a pretty rapid feedback loop of iterating, of like fixing bugs, adding new features, subtracting features. We're just learning and sort of hardening the product very, very quickly. And then at some point, while you're doing this, you're trying to find this idea of like product market fit, right? Which has nothing to do with scale. That's a totally different problem. And the problem of product market fit is, can we build a thing that solves a problem for enough customers that they're willing to, reach into their wallet and swipe their credit card?
Yeah.
Once we've achieved that, then this question of scale comes into play, right? And now we think, okay, we've built something useful, and we need to go back and refactor some of the existing technologies that we have because we made some trade-offs for speed. We need to refactor some of those technologies in order to account for all of the volume that we're going to start getting. It's not, again, I just want to be clear, because this is a really key difference, is that it's not that the product isn't working. Mm-hmm. It's that it needs to be able to work for a certain number of customers, right? Yeah. But when you think about data, and how data develops, it doesn't actually develop like that. So the first thing is for data teams, there's very rarely a design in advance, right? Yes. What typically happens is it's more like discovery, where you have a bunch of data that's available to you. You don't even know necessarily what questions you can answer. And it's by exploring that data first that you figure out, okay, what are all the answers that I can come up with that will be useful to the company? So that design component is not really there. The next thing you do is you start sort of building something relatively scrappy that just gets you the answers that you need. And that might be, hey, I want to look directly at some data in S3, or maybe I want to very quickly put together a pipeline in Airflow. I want to plug it into dbt, and then, I throw it into some open source, analytical like dashboarding tool like Metabase, and boom, I have a report for churn, and I can show that to my executive. And I know that that's not going to be 100% correct because my goal is to get it done quickly. It's the same a scale problem. But it's a little bit different, right? Because if I know the data is not quality, if I know it's not exactly correct, that would be the equivalent of having a product that didn't do the thing we expected it to do. Yeah. Right. But no one would associate that with a scale challenge. They would associate it with a product market fit problem, right? They say, okay, well, our product's not working the way that we expect. But because it's internal and you can't tie internal data to very clear revenue, then usually it just kind of goes ignore. Like, okay, look, this is good enough for now. We acknowledge it's going to be 10, maybe 20% off, and that's fine. We can just deal with that. So as time goes on, teams start to take more and more dependencies on this initial infrastructure that was just created to move really, really fast, right? And generally, in the early stages of the company, data is more of a support system. So you're providing dashboards to marketing, and you're providing dashboards to the product team on usage and stuff like that. But at some point, like maybe it's 3-4 years into a company's history, some things start to change. And you experience this transition of, okay, well, it was acceptable for the data to be directional to now it's actually unacceptable for the data to be directional, right? Like pipelines in accounting, and maybe we start getting audited on those pipelines. I can't afford to be 20% off anymore, right? I can't afford to say, oh, well, it says I should be charging this customer $20,000, and in actuality, that's like $50,000. Like that doesn't work. You get sued for that. And it's the same when you start talking about, I would say, bigger, more important, quote unquote, applications of data. So if I'm building some machine learning model that needs to make a prediction based on a training set, if my prediction is off by 20%, that actually has a financial impact, right? So this is the point that we're finally getting to the place where the product piece is really important. The accuracy is important. The problem is we've just spent 4 to 5 years building up all of this technology debt that was designed explicitly for that directional analytics, right? And so now the data person is sitting here with all of this, and they're like, okay, well, I need the data to be accurate right now because I have a use case that requires it. And the data engineering team is saying, I don't know what you want me to do. Like, I could go in and I could refactor everything. Then that's going to take me 2 years. Or I don't know. I'm not sure how to solve this problem. And that leads to this sort of like very hacky one-off, oh, my pipeline broke, I need a data engineer to come in and fix it because someone didn't make the right change. So the problems of scaling in data are very, very different from the problems of scaling in software engineering. And I think that the world that I described for data teams is where almost, especially in sort of the modern data lake cloud world, it's where almost every single company ends up eventually, and they don't perceive a way out of that.
So my gut feeling tells me that the problem started where you started, where you said, okay, we basically build something very quickly together, visualizes in Metabase, and do stuff, and we live with the, okay, it's not really so good, but it's fine, so we have something out. Do you think this is already a point where you have to make a different decision? Or is it fine to let it run like this for 4 or 5 years and then just turn around and do something completely different?
I think that I wouldn't say that it's fine or not. I would say that it's necessary. I think that there's no choice, right? Because in those early days, there really isn't the incentive to have that level of quality in the same. Sure. There's a very strong incentive for the product to have a level of quality, or else you can't. People won't buy it, right? I think that what needs to change, though, is there needs to be a better mechanism of moving from one state of the world to another state of the world relatively seamlessly. Like, some process has to exist to go from, all right, I've done something in a really hacky way, and it is valuable, to, okay, I've got something that's going to make me money, and I need accuracy, and I have to take the same underlying infrastructure and turn it into something valuable. The other big difference that I would say between sort of software engineering and data is that it's more, the problem actually usually doesn't even require that much of a refactor. What it really requires is explicit ownership, right? So if you're unable to scale your microservice, you're probably going to have to go in and say, okay, well, I need to use a totally different technology, or I need to just rebuild it in some way. That's actually not what most data teams are asking. They're not saying, oh, I want you to do a completely different technology. They're saying, I have some data and I just want it to be trustworthy. I want someone to own it. I want it to be stable. I want it not to break me every 5 seconds, right? And that's an ownership problem. It's not a technology problem, right? It's having someone who is who owns all of those various data sources that are sort of nodes in a graph and a pipeline that say, you know what, I agree with you. I agree that this doesn't need to change. I am going to take this ownership. And that means being very, very clear about what are the aspects of the data that are important to you, and then making sure that there is some change management process in place. So I think even the way that we deal with scale is like a fundamentally different issue. And I don't think that it's not as tightly coupled to doing technology refactors as it is in software.
Yeah. And when you talk about ownership, I think for you, ownership is not like, okay, we now have, I don't know, 5 or 6 people in the data team who basically owns ownership of data coming in. So for you, I think it's a more global concept. So you basically go beyond the data team and say, okay, in the end, I guess everyone has some kind of, let's say, ownership responsibility for the data that is getting used, for example, by processes or by machine learning models to generate revenue. So can you explain this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized it quite well, actually. I think that you have different stakeholders in the data generation and data consumption process. There are data producers who are oftentimes engineers on first-party data sets. They're responsible for extracting the data out of these applications and using them in those applications. So the use case is primarily transactional. However, that transactional data is typically the source of truth. It's the best data in the company. It's the most valuable data in the whole company. And so downstream, or I would say in between your data consumers, you've got some sort of data infrastructure, some data engineer that is responsible for maintaining the pipeline. And then you've got the person who's actually using that data to do something interesting, like build a machine learning model.
Yeah.
So what you actually need is but here's the problem. The problem is that not all data that's coming from these source systems starts off at useful. It doesn't always begin as being useful. There's a lot of it that's completely useless, right? And so you can't treat all of this exhaust as useful from day one, or else you're going to significantly reduce the deployment velocity of the software engineering team, and that's bad. We don't want that, right? We don't want to bottleneck to speed. We only want to start slowing them down once something becomes very useful, and that means that it's not on the data producer to decide what's useful. It's on the consumer to let the producer know what has become useful, and that usually means there's a much smaller subset of the data. It's not everything that needs to be secured.
Yeah.
It's a much smaller subset that is actively delivering business value, and those pipelines need to be secured and treated as like production systems.
That's great, because I think this was the missing piece of the puzzle that I just had in my head, because like what you were just describing on the other side of the problem, I had this like companies, already small companies, then ending up with 300 reports, dashboards and stuff where they use the data. So like they don't use it. So, but it's there. And some people, like when they go into Metabase and they pick, let's say, a kind of analysis, they assume that this one is useful. So they don't, because they cannot see from the outside. So, but okay, now it makes sense. So that really like it has different kind of aspects, the problem, but one is definitely like that you as a company in the end have to make a decision, which is basically where you start to really get value out of the data. And this is like you treat it basically as a critical process in your company. And I mean, then I guess it also makes the conversation a lot easier, because this is something, at least like if you then talk to finance people or everyone else, this is something that immediately understand. So if you say, hey, look, this is critical. When we have a problem here, we have a risk of either increasing costs significantly or losing revenue. People will start to make risk analysis and so on and so like. And because my second question was like that, what I was going to ask was like, okay, how do you motivate, for example, let's say software engineering and so on, who produce what you just said, the exhaust? It's often just an exhaust. It's just like something that drops off the table and you can just pick it up and try to make sense of it. So the question was for me, like, how do you motivate like a software engineering team to contribute to that? So besides that you say it's important, do you have other, let's say, approaches and ways that work really well to get them on board?
Well, and this is why in the article that I wrote, I sort of finished it by saying, to me, the crux of this is actually it's a communication problem. Right?
Yes.
You need to communicate the right information at the right time to the right person. If you've got this software engineer that for the past 3 years, no one has been using their data, and then on year 4, a data scientist builds a pricing model that makes $100 million a year, and nobody ever communicated with them that there's some column that they maintain that's really important to that pricing model, you can't possibly expect them to treat that column as if it was part of a production system. They don't know. It was never communicated. It's way too downstream. And yet this is oftentimes what teams kind of think is going to happen, right? Oh, well, of course I should have stability for my machine learning model. It's like, why would you think that? You never told anyone who owned this stuff that they should. And if in my experience, engineering teams are not evil people. Maybe some of them, but 99% of them are actually like really good people, and they care about the organization, they care about the business, and they don't want to break people. But if they don't have context when making some decision, then they're operating in a sort of veil of ignorance. The data warehouse is effectively a black box to them. They make some change and they assume, well, data people are going to handle it, and that's it. But if you do have some very valuable pricing model, just as an example, and let's say that software engineer knew ahead of time that if they made a change to that column, they were going to break that pricing model that was making $100 million a year, they probably wouldn't do it, right? If they had a choice, they'd probably say, you know what, I need to stop. I need to go and talk to the person who owns this. I need to let them know that a change is coming, or I need to figure out how to make my change in a way that's backwards compatible for what this person is consuming or is using. And that's the conversation that's not happening at all right now. And it should be happening all the time, right? You should have producers constantly going to consumers and saying, hey, I'm going to make these changes. How is it going to affect you? And you should have consumers constantly going to producers and saying, hey, you're making a change and I see it's going to affect me. Here's why either you shouldn't do that, or here's the way that I need you to do that. But that conversation doesn't exist. Both of those teams are sort of live in their own silos, and they get directed at the data engineer who sits in the middle. That's why the data engineering team is constantly flooded with work and backlog items and this never-ending set of tickets, is because they are just middleware, they're communicative middleware between these two sides that should basically just be communicating directly.
Yeah. So for you, so what I take away of that is really like, even step one, and so like, yes, totally agree to the communication part, but even like step one, make it visible for everyone that what it does. So because like, as you said, so like and I was in the same situation as well, that both sides were basically thinking everything was all right, but they totally was missing out that there was something in the middle that deeply connected both of each other. And so, and even like, okay, I have let's say it's a kind of stupid example, but it definitely resonates. It's like, when you started out in web analytics and tracking, there were still people who implemented tracking stuff by just making an event listener on when someone clicks on something with a CSS class and so on. And it was the same problem, because like the web designer doesn't really, how should they know that when like they remove the class of blue big button and replace it with white big button, that basically the whole tracking is breaking down and no conversions are measured anymore. So same problem, yeah, with the same stuff. So what was the solution? Make everyone aware of it, and then find out how to handle these things.
Exactly. And I think that there's two challenges with making people aware of it. And I think there are technology solutions here that are useful, and it's what I write about and talk about all the time with data contracts. The first thing is that there needs to be some mechanism of tying a data asset or some schema or a set of rules or constraints for the data to a downstream data asset that is impacted if those rules change in some meaningful way. And data lineage is extraordinarily useful. In fact, it's like required for this, right? So if you can imagine, there's sort of a source up at the top of the pipeline, and then there's multiple transformations, and then at the bottom of the pipeline you have a destination. What we want to say is a data consumer should be able to describe what are the things that need to be true about the data feeding into my destination. That needs to trickle back upstream at the column level to all of the sources where that information is most relevant. And then in CI/CD, so in the developer workflow, there needs to be some big stop button, whether it's a warning or a notification, or you're just breaking CI, whatever, that lets that engineer know, hey, if you make this change, someone has taken a dependency on you that's really valuable. And here is the context of what that dependency is. And if you do this, here is the effect that you are going to have, right? And once you have that lineage in between that sort of operates as the connective tissue between the producer and the consumer, then you can also communicate information the opposite way. So you could say, hey, data consumer, there's a new PR out that's going to break you. This is your opportunity to advocate for yourself, right? If you don't want to be broken, then you should go and make your case on this PR. Don't turn to us, the data engineering team, or don't turn to the infrastructure team, or don't turn to this middleware, because we don't know your use case. We're not going to be able to advocate for you. You need to be able to advocate for yourself. And once you have that sort of artifact that describes these are the things that I expect to be true, and this is what I call the data contract, now you have some Git-based set of constraints that evolves naturally as the business grows. And so before we just sort of start from, hey, I have the dashboard, and now I need some ML stuff. But ideally what you should have is, hey, I have a dashboard, and I'm doing all of this in sort of an experimental universe, but I think I'm going to need to use it for ML. So I'm going to move it. I'm going to ask for a contract. I'm going to make my producers aware of how they're going to be impacting me. And once that contract is taken, I now have a surface over which to iterate and evolve. And that might be asking for additional constraints. It might be extending the schema. It might be asking for brand new fields or events. But now you're beginning to treat your data like it is a product, and the data contract is the API. So that is sort of how we go from sort of conceptually this problem is solved to actually how the problem is solved using technology.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this, what I really like, and you described it to me really, really early on, and what I always liked about this concept is like, you don't end up with a very rigid process. So because this would be the natural enterprise answer to that. Okay, we build a very, very heavy process around this, would basically slow down everyone and basically get no one moving. And so I think the interesting thing about what you just described is like, it's still flexible enough to decide between the different kind of sites and which kind of level you want to bring it. But this is why I really like this example that you just had with going from a very simple dashboard, or let's say maybe a notebook where I was trying things out, and then figuring out, okay, this really has opportunity, so we move it up. And then we move it to a level that is differently. And so that you have the possibility to make this kind of decision. And then, yeah.
Exactly. It's a process of sort of graduating these data assets from a stage of immaturity to maturity. And I bring this up a lot, and I always say, like, data is different from software engineering. That sort of process I just described does not exist in software. There's no process of going from, oh, I've got something immature and now I'm moving to mature and I need to ask other people to support that doesn't exist. This is something that is unique to how the data ecosystem works. And if you don't have it, everything breaks, right? It all falls down. Like it's a requirement, because this is actually how people do their jobs. And so whatever technology system you use or whatever set of processes you use has to conform to the way that people actually work. It can't just take the software engineering discipline and say, okay, well, now I'm going to apply this to data, right? It's different.
That makes sense. So I want to close. So it was amazing, and I could easily go on for another hour about this topic, because like it's also like very close to my heart. But I want to close with a quick lightning round, because I have some interesting quick question that I want to ask you, which are not totally data related. So the first one: what is your best activity that lets you forget about all the pain that you have in data? What's the best thing to basically switch off and say, okay, I do something?
So I like exercising.
Yeah.
I try to go to the gym a few times a week. I like going on long walks. I will, Seattle is beautiful during the summer, so I'll walk around the city for usually like an hour a day.
Great. Well, it's awesome. If you have to decide A/B testing or interviews, which is more valuable to you?
Interviews.
Yeah. Why?
I think A/B testing is really great when you're trying to either A, optimize, or B, do something very risky for an uncertain outcome.
Yeah.
But if you're just trying to, I don't think there's any better alternative than understanding what people's actual pain is and really empathizing with their daily experiences than just having a conversation with them. I think a team could build an amazing product by just talking people. I don't think it's possible to do it through pure experimentation.
Yeah, totally agree. Last one. What is the best food to recover from a day that you basically spent within different kind of SQL queries to find out why the costs are basically 2.3% off and you cannot really find where this is happening?
I don't know if I could give a good answer to that because I literally eat the same thing every day. Now,
really?
my diet has not changed for like the last 3 years.
Wow. Okay. So can you share what you eat every day, or do you want to share or not?
Yeah, sure. I wake up in the morning and I have a protein shake.
Yeah.
And then I eat somewhere between 2 to 5 eggs. And then I have like another shake one for lunchtime. That's not a protein shake. It's more of like a vegetable fruit blend. I have a piece of grilled chicken breast. I have a piece of fruit, and then I have rice, and then I have that exact same meal for dinner again. And then
that's great.
Every day.
Yeah, perfect. So you save a lot of time with that. So it's at every place, supermarket, brain.
Oh, yeah. I can just make a beeline for what I know I want. All the people who work at the supermarkets, they know me. They're like, we already got it. Go ahead. So.
Okay, so I basically will sell this as the productivity hack that we now present for successful data people. So yeah.
If you want to be a LinkedIn influencer, don't prepare to never enjoy your food again.
Yeah. Okay. I will take this advice. Should do this as well. Excellent. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So I had a lot of things that I could take away. Even like when I know a lot of stuff that you were already talking about, there are always new angles, new aspects of that. So final step, where can people find you? Where should they connect? And so what's the best place?
Yeah. So I would say I'm most active on LinkedIn. If you just type in Chad Sanderson in the search bar, I should come up, or linkedin.com/Chad-Sanderson.
Yeah.
I'm also on Twitter nowadays.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
C Sanderson Data, and then I have a Substack called Data Products where I write sporadically, but hopefully I'll be getting more consistent. So,
and you have a community. So.
Oh right, yeah, I can't believe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Data Quality Camp. Yeah.
Data Quality Camp, and you can get there. You just type it in your browser, dataquality.camp/Slack.
Yeah, and I highly recommend for everyone who really cares about this stuff, and I think there's a lot of people really come around. I would say it's right now really like the best community that you can have, even like in data in general, just because of the amount of people in there who are doing this stuff, really doing. So not just writing about it, but really doing this stuff for years and so on. So you usually really get good answers, good feedback, good insights, and so on. So thanks a lot. All right. Thank you, everyone who's watching, and everyone who will listen to the recording later. And I will be back in 2 weeks. So now we have 1 week break, and so see you then. Thanks.